Chapter 1. Beneath the smiles and Southern hospitality and politeness were a lot of guns and liquor and secrets. By James McBride, The Color of Water. Hey, Mr. Landlord, lock up all the doors. When the police comes around, just tell them that the joint is closed. By Levine Johnson, Let the Good Times Roll. The hour was late. A cloud of dust followed Lee County, Mississippi. Sheriff's Patrol Unit 18, as it snaked down county backroads beneath a blue-black sky peppered with a million winking, blinking stars sprinkled over a fallen world. Distant flickering flashes of lightning showed in approaching thunderheads, highlighting the haloed moon. Glints of light reflected from ice crystals in lofty cirrus clouds preceding the advancing storm. A hard rain was coming soon. The whipping wind yanked dry cones from the boughs in the pine forests, and the dry grasses were rustling and whispering secrets to the nocturnal inhabitants of the woodlands. The man in the moon was puckering up to give a big kiss to the morning sun just a few hours below the horizon, as a shooting star streaked over the canopy of dense forests and troubled terrain somewhere between Saltillo and Guntown. Unit 18 rattled along its way to no-man's-land hard ground shrouded by mystery and hidden in a lawless wilderness where shadowed desires knew no shame and good-time Charlies and Charlenes kicked against the nudges of their creator, sinking beneath the weight of moral quicksand. On Michael Parker's first honky-tonk patrol as a deputy intern out of Ole Miss, he and Sergeant Bob Sarge Holcomb made the rounds of the county's nightclubs, Shannon's Gold Room, Palmetto's Cotton Patch, Tupelo's Shangri-La Club, and Mutt's Place, a county joint that no one deputy ever dared to enter alone. But around 12 a.m., the deputies headed toward the Rendezvous Club, a lawless hole-in-the-wall outpost that made the others pale by comparison.
I'm going to show you things that your professors in the ivory towers of Oxford know nothing about,
Michael's penguin-bellied mentor said, as he smacked a wad of double-mint gum to mask a severe case of tobacco breath. Lee County Sheriff Gil Simpson, a well-known fiddle player before his election, had left his young deputy intern from Ole Miss to be tutored by Sarge, his senior deputy. Fiddling Gil had a glint of shrewdness in his dark eyes, and he found Michael to be naive but likable and an asset to the department. Parker had worked for the Federal Bureau of Investigation as a fingerprint tech, and he mentored local kids in his junior law enforcement association. The sheriff thought that might be just the sort of wholesome stuff to highlight in his re-election campaign. When Sarge was assigned to mentor Michael, he asked Jill what he thought of the intern. The sheriff wrinkled his furrowed brow and said,
"Well, he's a romantic. A goody-two-shoes who sirs and ma'ams everyone he meets. And he probably shouldn't be in law enforcement. He's so trusting that he'd pet a Tombigbee river gator if it swam up to him. He's like a cat, and his endless curiosity will one day be his undoing. Though I suspect he may have 9 lives. He's always poking his nose where it doesn't belong, and asking too many questions. He pushes and stretches so far sometimes that he forgets that it's a long walk back. The big words he uses in incident reports get on my last nerve and make my head hurt. I tell him, son, just give me the basics, not war and peace. But he is a true penny. I would trust him with the lives of my family."
So, off they went to the Rendezvous Club. With Michael riding shotgun, Sarge roared up the Natchez Trace and then traversed a bumpity-bump state highway until it ran out. He wheeled down a freshly paved blacktop road, slinging sticky black tar under the wheel well of the county cruiser, and fishtailed down a gravel road to a dead end overlooking a hidden valley nestled in thick Tombigbee forests. Sarge brought the white police ambassador to rest at the crest of the overlook. He sat there a bit for emphasis, chomping on his signature smelly cigar and racing the special 360 cubic inch engine in a steady rum cadence. Beneath them was a perfect bowl cut out of the forest, an artificial amphitheater for night owls, where gangsters and the creme de la creme of Southern high society rubbed elbows, tossing back the stiff-bottled liquor and hot moonshine served up in the dry county. Bearded men in overalls danced the two-step with pink-faced darlings in baby blue jeans, next to men in tuxedos and women in evening gowns trying to resurrect Chubby Checker's twist. The bands blended George Jones with the Doors and an occasional Doug Kershaw Cajun fiddle. It made for a raucous symphony composed in the bottoms of bottles and clouds of marijuana-fueled dreams, consumed with gusto by the regulars at the notorious Honky Tonk. Sarge picked up his binoculars and zeroed in on the parking lot. The remote night spot was teeming with vehicles and the usual suspects from the tri-state area. The sudden brightness of the neon sign above the entrance to the club stung Sarge's eyes, and he winced, squinted, and looked again. He thought the compound looked like the Lee Drive-In Theater in Tupelo, all those cars in rows pointing toward the screen. The club in this case, and this could be a gathering of fans of those all-night Elvis or Audie Murphy movies that Frank Hurd often ran there. He lowered his field glasses and thought again. Maybe it's like a graveyard, rows and rows of tombs, and the club is a giant flashing headstone. There's a reason that a colony of expectant buzzards perches on the tree line above the club each morning. Such maudlin introspection made his head hurt and was better left to the college boy beside him. Besides, this is prime Dixie Mafia turf. Buford Pusser is no longer sheriff in McNairy County, Tennessee. Towhead White, the vice president of the Dixie Mafia, died in a hail of bullets at the LJ Motel south of Corinth, and Louise Hathcock, the outlaw queen, was shot dead by Pusser, but the Dixie Mafia lives on. The State Line crowd is well represented here tonight at the Rendezvous Club, where deals are struck so no high-stakes poker games will be robbed by any affiliate members. It's a safe house of sorts, neutral ground where anything goes. The deputies sat silently staring down into the basin beneath them. Pickups, some bearing giant replicas of the stars and bars, were in the club's lot. They were driven by chop shop mechanics who serviced the infamous Tupelo to Corinth auto theft corridor. The trucks were parked next to hot Cadillacs, quick-titled to members of Ace Connolly's gang from Memphis. 18-wheeler cabs, belonging to outlaw truckers, dotted the landscape. They brought in the little white pills that wired players in the all-night card and dice games, running non-stop in the back rooms of Lee County's network of clubs. A long, black hearse, housing a shiny new casket with a false bottom for narcotics, sat alongside souped-up Mustangs owned by local bootleggers. The Corvettes of bored rich kids from Tupelo rounded out the eclectic car collection fronting the club. All the vehicles encircled a garishly lighted lean-to structure that seemed to stand without visible support neon lights, fiberglass walls, and sawdust floors. Sarge handed the field glasses to Michael and said,
"See over there? The one with the swagger and the strut of petty authority is Constable Robbie Hawkins. He stands lookout for the local burglary ring between here and Pontotoc. He's a worthless, motherless excuse for a police officer, a former quarterback who was hit in the helmet once too often. Don't turn your back on him. He warns certain bootleggers when we're coming with our search warrants. That's why we never find anything."
Michael looked at Sarge as if he had experienced a sudden epiphany.
"That shocks your sense of order, of right and wrong. You know, good guys and bad guys, white hats, black hats, and all of that storybook stuff, doesn't it?"
he asked. Michael just shook his head, evading the question, and peered through the binoculars. Sarge sat in silence for a long while, drawing on the stub of his cigar. He finally turned to his young, baby-faced partner, who was trying to absorb all that the glasses revealed, and said,
They never taught you about this nasty reality in those criminal justice classes at University of Mississippi, did they?
Sarge sighed deeply, shook his head, and spit pieces of his cigar out the driver's window. He hitched up his gun belt and asked,
You ready to ride down into perdition, son? Got your slapjack, Mr. Slyboots? Got your bullet, Barney?
He laughed so hard that his belly jiggled like a tub of Jell-O. He turned the car radio wide open. WTUP was playing Jerry Reed, and Sarge belted out,
When you're hot, Michael. When you're not, you're not. Let's go get 'em. They can tell it all down at City Hall.
He bumped the car into low gear, and they coasted silently down the slope and eased into the midst of the fray. As they exited the car, couples were dancing in the lot, swaying to the beat of the music inside serenades to countless low-rent rendezvous. What Yankees called fireflies, and Southerners knew were lightning bugs, sparkled, danced in the night air, and competed with the neon. To their left, a man relieved himself from too much beer. And to their right, two frowsy men were wrestling in the mud, fighting over a blonde who watched them like a bored hen watches two roosters in the barnyard. She was wearing a white cowgirl hat adorned by blue feathers. The pink rhinestones covering her shirt twinkled in the light from the backwoods night spot. Bored by her suitors and the spectacle, she gave Michael a long, appraising stare as he walked up. Then she offered him her best seductive come-hither smile.
My, you're a young one, aren't you? I'd love to rock your cradle, baby boy.
The long-in-the-tooth vixen cooed as sparks flew from the batting of fake eyelashes.
Dolly's got lots of love. Save the last dance for me, cowboy.
The laughing lady challenged, hands on her hips. Michael suspected that Dolly wasn't offering real love, but something else, a cheap imitation of the real thing, and the price of admission would be too steep to bear. He also thought that if practice made perfect, she might be an expert, not at real love, but at frictional games. He also suspected that the illusion of beauty she proffered would melt away in the harsh light of the morning sun. He'd listened to a radio pastor that very day. The preacher had sounded as if he was speaking directly to him when he'd said, If you dance with the daughter of the devil, you got to know that her father will want to cut in. So he just smiled and reminded himself that it was not his charm or good looks, but the badge. She was just one of many broken birds he would encounter in the club's women, from the local factories and diners who were harmless in intent but deadly by design. They hurt no one more than they hurt themselves as they looked for love in all the wrong places and shouted to the world, I want to be happy. So bad. Michael kept moving. Robbie Hawkins, working a toothpick round and round in the right corner of his mouth, had joined them. Hawkins shot a look at him, one that suggested he thought Michael might be less than a real red-blooded American male for not accepting Dolly's offer, or at least giving her the customary slap on her behind. He thought it ungentlemanly, and wondered if Michael would snitch on him. Robbie occasionally succumbed to the lure of the libertine's dream, and bellied up to the world's buffet table to take a big bite out of Eve's apple. During the department's orientation on the county night spots and the department's policy of fraternizing with bar queens, Robbie was the one who had winked and whispered to Michael,
Yeah, but a man's got to do what a man's got to do, don't you know?
As the officers passed a Lincoln with Lowndes County plates that spelled barrister, a slender, intoxicated dandy fell out of the driver's side door, disheveled, with a cigarette affixed to the back of his right ear. He swept his long blonde hair from his eyes, looked wide-eyed at Michael, and said,
Excuse me, my daddy told me that I was going to drive him to drinking if I didn't stop driving my hot rod Lincoln.
He put out his hand to Michael and said,
My name is Reggie Morris. Pleased to meet you, deputy.
Michael nodded at the man and continued walking toward the club with Sarge. As they waited to be buzzed in by a burly bouncer with a crooked sneer, the band struck up a blues-driven ode to Janis Joplin, who had just been found dead in her Hollywood apartment. A slurred, alcohol-tainted harmony rose from the inebriated partygoers inside. Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. The hair of the dog that bit them all mangled me and Bobby McGee beyond recognition. The lightning bugs disappeared. The moon hid its face behind the clouds, and the first drizzle of rain swept in from the west, covering Michael's shiny new gold star on his chest with a fine mist. His grandmother, Pearl, had polished it until it gleamed for his first day on the job. Michael squinted into the silver rain, suddenly glittering with blues and pinks from the reflection of the neon, and he remembered the dancing lights of the discos when he worked in Washington. His mind turned to the on-again, off-again relationship with a girl he'd met when he had worked in Washington, a girl with burnished blonde hair, mischievous charm, and a vitality that oozed from her pores.
Sarge, I can't wait to tell my girlfriend in Memphis about this place. Dixie Lee will never believe it.
His thoughts drifted from his girlfriend to the weekly reports he was required to submit to his University of Mississippi professor, Tim Charles. This one will be a doozy. The door to the dark side flung open with a rattlesnake buzz, a rushing tsunami of guitars and saxophones, and a chorus of hyena cackles washed over the deputies. 1,000 eyes glared at the lawmen, stares from rebels who self-destructed in their rage against conformity and thought that meant they were free. A palpable sense of evil seemed to hiss from every corner of the juke joint's makeshift walls and from beneath every layer of a sawdust floor soaked in beer and trampled by countless pairs of cowboy boots. The door closed behind Michael, enveloping him in the murky belly of the beast just as the full brunt of the storm arrived outside with violent claps of thunder. It was the first step into darkness and uncertainty for a naive but heroic heart seeking a yardstick by which to measure the good and true, a rock on which to anchor himself. He had a sudden sense that nothing would ever be the same, and he remembered the radio pastor who had posed the question, "Will your life be chaotic and without purpose, or a fine-tuned novel written in heaven?" His eyes adjusted to the dark, and there on the wall of the Rendezvous Club was a sign that said, "If you have an itch, keep scratching. If you don't like the song that life is playing, unplug the jukebox.